What's up, Mortgage Coach and Trust Engine community? I am pumped about this interview. It is the first interview I've done with James Dwiggins. Although we did have two great conversations at two big industry events. I met him last year at the Gathering of the Eagles put on by the Housing Wire, which was phenomenal.
Yes.
And then
Great event.
really, I think, James, tell me what you thought about the Gathering a couple months ago. I thought it was incredible.
I thought it was great. Yeah. The blend this year was cool between, kind of residential and mortgage coming to the same space. Certainly there was no shortage of conversation around change in the industry. Um, and it was interesting to have, different speakers and backgrounds blending it. So ironically, I just interviewed Clayton Collins today, actually, on our
Oh,
pod. And
nice.
we were talking about just how he's trying to blend mortgage, residential, appraisal, inspection, just all of that into, this more cohesive unit. And it makes sense considering sort of how housing's going to move forward and just artificial intelligence and things, just trying to bring all these pieces of the experience together. So the Gathering was a great event. I loved it. And it's going to be at the Broadmoor next year, which is, for those of you who've never been, it's a killer venue. So all the more reason to attend it for
Yeah,
sure.
no, it's going to be a great event. Big fan of Housing Wire.
Yeah.
Would not have met you without that event. And of course, I would not have met you without an introduction from Ashley Terrell.
She's
Uh,
great.
yeah,
Yeah.
she's great. She did just an incredible job of helping me have a lot of great conversations at the Gathering or the Gathering of the Eagles. That was
Yeah.
pure real estate. I think that has now been merged with the Gathering going
That's
forward.
yeah, they put it into one event now, which I like the format. I think it's good for sure.
Good.
And by the way, they're doing pickleball. And what I love about the fact it's gonna be at the Broadmoor, instead of it being in Scottsdale where it's 109, and when we were in Austin at the first one where we met, it was like 110. People wanted to get heat stroke while they were playing pickleball. So in Colorado, it won't be that bad
Yeah, no,
next year.
it'll
Yeah.
definitely be a lot nicer outside. So I think of you as a real estate entrepreneur. You run a large real estate platform, which I want
Mhm.
you to, for the audience, most of them are either loan officers, producing managers of some sort, or heads of production,
Yeah.
typically who watches this, and they're trying to be more valuable to real estate agents.
Great.
But I know you have both a tech company, Rise, and
Yep.
then you have a real estate platform, Next Home. Could you just kind of describe both of those
Yeah.
platforms that gives context to everybody?
Yeah. So my background's in residential real estate. I'm third generation. My grandfather started his company in 1967. So both my parents were brokers, both my grandparents were brokers. So I've been on the residential side. I also have started and sold a couple tech companies earlier on in my career, and then got into franchising where my current partner and I worked and ran a company called Realty World Northern California, Nevada, which we eventually bought. And then we started a new company called Next Home about 10 years ago, excuse me. And that company is our main focus. We sold off Realty World in 2020, but Next Home is about 630 real estate offices across the U.S. Just shy of about 6,000 agents, and the company does about 12 billion in volume. So it's not a small operation. It's been our blood, sweat, and tears. Bootstrapped it. No investors. My partner and I are the investors, and built it up. We lovingly call our team members Next Homies. And it's a very fun company, really, really unique culture. And then about 2 years ago, I started and co-founded a company called Raise, and that is a prop tech company that is fundamentally transforming the way that agents collaborate on a real estate transaction with consumers, and not just the transaction. It's basically bringing transparency to everything that a realtor does, from every moment, from the moment that they meet the client to the moment they close a deal. The system logs phone calls, it tracks activities, it tracks expenses, it tracks time, it tracks mileage, and it creates this very unique collaborative experience. So the buyer or seller can see what their agent is going to be doing for them over the course of 60 to 90 days. And it provides just incredible transparency into the work that agents do, because most people think agents just open a door, write a contract, and get paid too much money, which couldn't be further from the truth. So this beautiful program that's just coming to market right now, spent about 2 years building it, raised a ton of money from the industry to put it out there, and it's going to be wildly successful. We're really excited to get it to market, and obviously the timing is is very good considering all of the mayhem in our business. We are very excited to get the thing out, and agents are chomping at the bit to start using it. So it's going to be something that will, I think, push back on commission pressure, and then it'll help agents very clearly articulate value to buyers and sellers. So that's a new venture that I've been involved in now for a couple of years too. So
Well, as you said the word transparency, I just put equals value. I
Mhm.
just, when you look at companies like Uber and you look at the
100%.
transformation that's taken place in this digital world that we live in, transparency equals value. And
Yep.
so, you know,
Yep.
and it equals convenience. It equals, you know, and at the end of the day, when you look at most of the consumer movements that have taken place, transparency, which has improved convenience, and that convenience has increased trust.
Yep.
And if you do it the right way, it really scales. So I can't wait to unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, we're excited for, we're getting it rolled out in residential real estate first, obviously. But our long-term vision with it is to move it so that it's also covering, mortgage, title, escrow, appraisal. So the idea would be a buyer is sitting down with their agent, and the agent goes, instead of here's the 150 things I'm going to do for you over the course of, 90 days, here's the 450 things that myself and all of my partners will be doing to help you get into this property over the course of 90 days. And that transparency, we think, could benefit across multiple aspects of the real estate transactions. So there's a lot of really interesting potential with the product long term.
I
So
love it. I love it. Well, let's get into the headline here. Like
yeah.
I'm packaging this, and I'm doing a whole series of interviews that I call "Getting Ahead of the NAR Settlement."
Mhm.
Obviously, it sounds like you might be a couple years ahead of the NAR settlement, hearing the prop tech innovation that you just called out. But let's just cover: is this a big deal? Like, is it a big deal? How big of a deal it is? And just give your narrative around that.
Yeah, I mean, it is a big deal and it's not. So it just depends upon it just depends upon quite a few things. So obviously the settlement that NAR put in place overall was very good for the industry. There certainly were some losers and winners in that scenario. The companies we call the $2 billion club, mine included, were not covered in the settlement. And so that's left those companies to, deal with the lawyers and defend themselves separately from the NAR settlement. The membership, who are realtor members, are covered as long as they are a realtor member by August when the class notice is issued. Then they will be covered individually from any further litigation. But the companies in the $2 billion club, so to be clear, $2 billion worth of volume in 2022 is the metric, are left to defend themselves and settle accordingly, which is happening by most of them behind the scenes. The big changes to this, what's going to do the industry is it's really about taking the sharing of compensation off the MLS. Not a good move from it's basically creating less transparency. That is certainly going to cause a lot of, I think, chaos come August 17th. That's currently the date where all of this stuff goes into effect. Um, I think that there's a lot of people who are going to try and figure out ways around the settlement, which is a mistake because the Department of Justice and the plaintiffs have made very clear, if you're not part of the settlement terms, you try to get around it, they're probably going to come after you legally. I know that there are CIDs being issued by the Department of Justice right now around the industry. I've heard of 9 so far. For everybody who doesn't understand what that is, it's a civil investigative demand. It's basically the DOJ's ability to start investigations without filing a lawsuit. And one of the biggest problems is, inside the settlement, you can still technically share commissions, but I think that's a huge mistake. And there is a contingent of us trying to get the industry to stop doing that. What that means is, while you can't share commissions on the MLS, you still can sit down with the seller, ask the seller to pay X% and share part of that with the buyer's broker. And that's a huge issue because the reason we're in this process and this problem to begin with is essentially conspiracy claims that the industry has propped up compensation. While the plaintiff agreed to these terms with NAR, a little conspiracy on my side. I think they're setting us up for another lawsuit down the line. And there is no reason to share commissions any further because this is all relevant. Fannie and Freddie have already stated that as long as the agent puts in the purchase contract that the seller's to pay the buyer's agent's compensation, then it doesn't affect interested party contributions and it can be financed. So what we're looking at as an industry is really there's three ways that this needs to go. And this is going to answer your question now on why there's going to be some chaos and not. The seller can offer a concession to the buyer for closing costs, and the buyer can then do what they want with those closing costs. The buyer can pay the buyer's agent, or the buyer's agent, with obviously the buyer's request, can stipulate that the seller's to pay the buyer's agent's compensation, and everything operates normally. There's zero reason to share commissions any further based upon this criteria. The problem is why I think there's going to be a big deal and not is the people that understand what I just said. Okay, well, that's pretty straightforward. This is the new, what we call consumer-centric model. It works operate similarly to commercial real estate. The ones that don't, there's going to be a tremendous amount of questions on whether I can, whether I can't, should we do it, should we not? And the biggest issue is if associations are creating these forms that all the brokerages are using, then I think, as well as many other lawyers think, that we're opening ourselves up to further litigation. The biggest problem boils down to one thing. As everybody and your listeners know, obviously the MBA and NAR worked very hard to be able to have veterans pay for the representation. The biggest problem will be for residential real estate on whether a buyer's agent's compensation can be financed and paid for by the buyer if the seller's not offering any type of compensation, which, as we know right now, is not available. That's a big problem. It's a big problem for buyers. It's a big problem for the agents. Candidly, and I'm not shy about this, I think this screws low-income Americans. I think it screws veterans. I think it screws minorities. These are serious issues that will cause one of two things to occur. Number one is a buyer being unrepresented in a transaction they should not be. And I'm not just advocating for realtors. Like, we all know this is an infrequent transaction that is complicated. Or number two, you'll see an increase in dual agency, both of which insurance companies do not want. I've talked to insurance companies on this. They don't want that to occur, both of which increase liability for the seller and essentially are going to cause all sorts of problems. So there is and there isn't. For people that understand what's going to go on and how to maneuver, it's not anything that's overly complicated on how to structure agreements and negotiate. For people that don't, it's going to be chaotic come August 17th. And then the big one is, buyers being able to afford representation. That's a serious hurdle that our industry has to figure out. Or a lot of people are going to they're going to make decisions. They're going to buy houses. They're going to feel that they weren't represented because the listing agent was not representing their best interests, or they're going to go unrepresented and something's going to go wrong and you're going to see massive litigation everywhere. So,
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely a time of confusion, uncertainty. But whenever that happens, there is opportunity for people
huge.
that prepare. So before I get into, tactics and strategies, I've interviewed a lot of top leaders in the real estate space, the mortgage space. I have some opinions of my own that I want to test out on you. But first of all, what are your just gut on August, what is it, 17th? Is this all going to go down in August, or is somehow date's going to change? Or is that like the date?
There's always a potential for it to get pushed, but that already was pushed. I think that's a date that everyone's set on, and most associations and MLSs are, I'm pretty tied in with that group, are preparing for those dates. So I don't see that being pushed any further, maybe to September, but whether it's August or September, it's going to be in that window.
So it's going down. Yeah. So for mortgage professionals, you just heard it from a guy that is responsible for the leadership of over $12 billion in real estate, very well connected in the industry. And, no one's planning for this to get moved. So execute. Yeah. Like, it's go time. It's not ignore time.
Yeah.
So a couple things, and tell me how you align on this, is one, it's going to push a professionalization of the entire real estate space. I mean, for the most part, more listing agents, by and large, they have presentations, they have processes. The good ones follow those processes and presentations. And by and large, buyer's agents haven't had the, formal processes and presentations that they consistently implement. So
they haven't had to.
They haven't had to, but they have to going forward. And that's a big, call it, like, if you were a mortgage professional doing, hey, let's work on our combined process and presentation to create obvious value for the buyer, that'd be a really good idea for mortgage people to lean into. Thoughts on
Yeah.
that?
100, everything actually you said, I agree with. I think you're going to see attrition rates of somewhere between 20 and 40% of the industry will go away. And to be clear, there's too many realtors
So
anyway. So it's
30
not
to 40%.
20 to
Okay.
40%,
20
20
to
to
40.
40%. Yep. And that number is based upon whether a buyer can finance their agent's compensation into a loan or not. So if they can, the lower number; if they can't, the higher number. Because I don't think, uh, I don't think a lot of realtors will be good enough to be able to convince or articulate why they're worth what they are, and or the buyer just simply can't afford to pay it, and they're just going to have to deal with an alternative direction. That'll just cause attrition in general. Um, I do think you're going to see the industry get more professional, and also the systems will get better, because even if 20 to 40% of the realtors went away, it's not like consumers are all of a sudden wanting to do this unrepresented. That's not, every study you can read shows that most people don't want to do this on their own. So that will roll up underneath more professional agents who have better systems, who can operate at maybe a little bit more of an efficient rate. So you'll see the business roll back up underneath companies in some way, shape, or form, in my opinion. I do think
Yeah.
you'll see a lot of alternative business models pop out. There's already alternative business models, just in case anybody's listening. Like, there's been since 1976, Help You Sell's been around. So I just think you'll see more of them that will pop up, and it's not going to be hourly, to be clear. Number one, nobody knows this, but the IRS carve out that the industry has to be independent contractors, you can't actually charge hourly. So that actually won't happen. Not to mention, if you pay hourly, if you read any study ever, consumers hate paying hourly for services like that. It's literally like the last thing they want to do, and nobody wants to get a bill every month when they haven't purchased their house. So again, I don't think you'll see that be popular. Flat fee, menu of services, traditional commission split will probably still be the dominant, with the third one being the most popular still. People like to be able to pay when they close a deal. It's like, it's found money. You have equity, but you don't have it until it's tangible in your hands. And so I think you'll see that model still be the most common in the space. And then as far as presentations, yeah, that's literally what Raise is going to do, is build out a presentation in a way that helps an agent articulate very clearly what their value is. We've never had to do it. And that's the sad part. And the funny thing is like, when I do keynotes, I did one last week in New York. It was at 800 people. And I said, how many of you in the room think you spend more time working with a buyer than a seller? Raise your hand. Everybody in the room raises their hand. I said, how many of you in the room would go meet with the seller and not have them sign a listing agreement and then do all the work? Nobody raised their hand. Like, why the hell are you doing that with buyers then? You just said you spend more time with them. So we haven't done the basics. And what we teach is, treat every buyer the same way you treat your seller. Sit down, do a consult, do a lot of listening. What are they looking for? Understand their needs, explain to them the process, how much work is involved, the timeframes that happen with this. Literally articulate what you do so that they don't think you're just opening houses. I can't tell you how many times I hear this, Dave. Like, people go, oh, realtors just open a door and then they write a contract and get paid too much. Bullshit. That's not actually what happens at all. Like, if you think about the average showing, the agent calls, sets up an appointment. They drive, meet you at the property, show the property, talk to you about it in the driveway, call the listing agent, ask for a disclosure package, read the disclosure package, go through the notes, send you an email, write down all the details about what you need to know in the disclosure package, because we all know the buyer ain't going to read it. So, like, multiply that times 10 houses, and now you've got 50 to 60 hours worth of work the realtor's already done. People don't see what they don't see. Transparency is going to be important. By the way, that applies to loan officers too, because nobody has any idea what's actually going on behind the scenes. The more that we can create transparency into the work that we're doing, they'll understand why we charge what we charge. Whenever you have people that, whenever you don't see something, you just make assumptions. That's how the human brain operates. So the industry has to grow up across the board. And I think this mindset we've been taught, I've been in this business a long time, but of like, shelter your clients. Screw that. Get them involved. Like, you want to keep some of the drama out of it, but you also want them to know that you're doing a bunch of shit. Like, you're working on things. So to me, there's going to be a major reckoning on who's good at what they do. They can articulate that. And I'll make the statement on your pod. I think there'll be agents that charge more, because I think consumers, to your comment, you started this thing with that convenience. There's a lot of people who are in a financial position that if somebody could just take care of everything and I don't have to think about it, because for your listeners, I have a 3-year-old, my wife's in television, like we don't have time to do anything. If I can outsource stuff, like I will gladly pay for it. So I think there's an actual opportunity for people to charge more than what they do by providing additional value on top. So
Well, I mean, there's a reason that there's a Nordstrom's and
yeah,
a Neiman Marcus. You know, there are people that will pay more, and there will people that are do-it-yourselfers. And at the end of the day, it's all around value, and transparency is value. Presentation, making complex concepts simple is
yeah,
value.
yeah.
Sounds like you've done that. You know, one of the things I've been interviewing a lot of these top loan officers, and I'm seeing them create. You know, I actually interviewed one of the top loan officers at Cross Country on Friday, and this was an example of how he's doing value. He's, you know, literally showing, here's seller paid, here's financed in the price, here's paid in cash. By the way, this is powered by Mortgage Coach. Like 34% of the top loan officers in the country use our platform. But I think this is the future. Like, it used to be that realtors didn't care about how loan officers presented options and how they showed things.
Yeah.
Tell me if you agree. I think especially buyer's agents are going to care how a loan officer communicates commission options and
Look,
strategies going
I,
forward.
I agree 100%. And look, so, in addition to franchise, we have a mortgage bank. So, we have LOs in our company. We talk to them all the time. This idea that everyone's going to go do it on their own, I think is very far-fetched. And I'm not saying that with like rosy eyes trying to make sure that we're here. They're going to do this 2 to 3 times in their life. Most Americans are going to come up with every possible dime they have to be able to afford housing in this very expensive country. I don't care how much artificial intelligence is created. I still want somebody to tell me, am I making the right choice? Are there other options? Should we draft this contract differently? Here's this one. Like, people go, well, what happens if the buyer can't afford the commission? Okay, we'll draft the contract so that it's over asking and still ask the seller to pay it, because what does the seller care about? The net. Like, so there's just this concept of, you got to get creative. We have to show what we do. We have to explain why we are charging what we charge. And this is this comment. We had some really good friends of ours that just bought a house. They spent, I don't know, was it like $3 million? Welcome to an average price home in Northern California. But for them, it was everything. And they were up in a multi-offer situation, and the realtor they used, happened to be a friend of mine, was able to get them into contract. They were able to get the financing done. They managed to get everything together, and they knew exactly why, because they structured a contract correctly. They worked with the seller. They worked with the seller's agent. They got the house, and they were like, I don't care how much money it would have cost me to have representation. This was exactly what we were looking for, was somebody to guide us through this process. And we just wanted someone to help us. That is always going to be worth money to someone. It's just a matter of what they're looking for. So I wholeheartedly believe loan officers and agents should be working more closely together. They should be thinking about, what's wrong with, by the way, doing a dual presentation?
Yeah.
Meeting down with the seller and saying, by the way, this is my partner. This is who we use to get you financed. This is an important part of the process, because we all know in the mortgage business, if the loan don't close, like the deal doesn't go and the realtor is pissed. So like finding the right LO and having somebody who can work with you to close deals, like that's what we should be doing, is being much more closely working together on these presentations.
So one last concept I want to validate, and then we'll kind of go into wrap up mode. Anything you want to make sure gets covered, we can do that. But I've been now in lending and housing for 38 years, and I think the American dream is absolutely owning a home. I mean, that is as strong as ever. But I think the at the core of the American dream is owning a home and achieving financial freedom. And when you look at who owns and who rents, the wealth gap in America
it's massive.
it is who owns and who rents.
Yep.
I mean, I think the latest numbers from NAR were like 10,400 for renting, almost 400,000 for
Yeah.
owning.
Yeah. I saw the same one.
That's the wealth
Uh,
gap in America. And
yeah.
at the end of the day, owning your home and either having enough money in assets that paying off your mortgage is a strategic financial planning decision, or actually doing the Dave Ramsey and paying off your mortgage. That's the American dream. What are your thoughts on both mortgage and real estate professionals? Hey, realtor, help drive a great transaction and help that family achieve the home of their dream, and mortgage professional, help close that loan on time, but also be deliver a little financial literacy and help that consumer. Hey, should you pay an extra $100 a month on your mortgage? Should you invest, take this loan versus that loan? I believe that the mortgage and real estate professional need to start putting more intention around wealth creation, around real estate, and as a value proposition, and actually execute on it. Any thoughts on that?
I unfortunately agree with you again. I usually like to have debate when I'm a guest or someone's on my pod, but
I was actually after some of the conversations
I
we had, I was expecting like a little bit of
you've managed to ask three things I agree with, but I'll go deep with your question because I think there's another layer on top. How's that? So I do think we should be. I think we need to be less transactional. I think our industry needs to nurture relationships more. I think we need to be thinking long term about relationships. So instead of it just being, we do a deal and then we never contact our client again because we're on to the next deal, we need to be thinking about how we're in touch with that client over the what I call, life cycle of home ownership for the 8 to 13 years they own that property. I think the realtor and the loan officer should be looking at that. There's great programs out there, formerly like Milestones, called homeowner.ai. I think it's a great concept, not concept, but great program that's doing stuff like that. And I think that the industry, I'm generalizing all of us now, need to be thinking about how we create these long-term relationships so that we get repeat business, but we aren't looked at as just salespeople. And that's where I think our industry is going wrong. Everything's top of funnel, and we're not looking at this person's going to sell their house again in 8 to 13 years. Are they going to remember me? Have I been providing value to them over that 8 to 13 years? And the loan officer and the agent absolutely through technology can do that. And I think that's a starting point. I'll go deeper now. Our industry has been horrific, and I blame everyone for this. Everyone's irritated with mainstream media's reporting of the NAR settlements, the lawsuits. I remember, by the way, back in 2008, mortgage industry got the brunt of it, right? It was just everybody was a loan officer sucked. And, we did all these things. We all know that the truth is somewhere in between. The problem that I see now is I say this again in these keynotes that I do. I go, look, I agree with you. Mainstream media sucks. Like they're not getting anything right. I mean, they can't even do basic reporting. But I'll ask this question. I go, when was the last time any one of you actually went out and tried to set the record straight? Where you reached out to local media or even national media and said, with respect, that's not accurate. I'd love to come on your show. I'd like to put information out. How are we as an industry setting the record straight? And if we don't do it, then mainstream media will. And some journalist that's trying to get a story done in 6 hours is going to put a narrative out that's wrong. I think, MBA, NAR can do a better job with communication by a long shot, but I also think it's also local. Every single loan officer and realtor should be communicating on a regular basis on their website, through social media posts about things that are happening, taking national headlines and making them local. Great comment that Clayton said on the pod today was that. And there's nothing stopping someone from creating relationships with local media. So my wife is a reporter for CBS in the Bay Area, 1.5 million viewers. She always sends me emails when anything real estate related hits her desk because people are always pitching stories, right? Since March 15th, how many stories have been pitched about countering mainstream media's narrative on the lawsuits? Take a guess at how many people have reached out to her to try and set the record straight. There's
Not
only
enough.
one answer: zero.
Zero?
Zero, not one single real estate company or anyone came out and said, we'd like to come on your show and talk about this stuff. Not one. So, my comment here is, to your point, there's absolutely this opportunity to create a tighter relationship, nurture that relationship, create something more long-term. And there's also an opportunity to get out there and start putting the word out about home ownership, what it does, why it's important, how we need more housing, the issues that the, Department of Justice and the president and everybody's talking about is junk fees, mortgage costs, title costs, realtor costs are the reason why housing is too expensive. Bullshit. That's not it at all. It's simple supply and demand economics. We know there's not enough housing in this country. We need to figure out how to get more housing to bring prices down or stabilize them and make it more affordable for people. So to your comment earlier, we can create more generational wealth, which is the number one driver. I mean, we all know that real estate is 20% of our GDP. Banking, finance, all of that combined is 20%. So to me, as an industry, we have to get way better at communication and getting everybody out there communicating so that the narrative is controlled by us who's actually in it, instead of letting politicians, pick a narrative for, election or re-election, I should say. So I'm off my soapbox, but you
All
can
right.
tell I'm
Well, no,
passionate about
I
it.
mean, I'm going to have to jump on that and up that too. So, when I think, I think we brought up the term in my last interview with Clayton Collins, news hacking. And I talked very much about how to take something national, localize it, and then personalize it.
Yeah.
Personalize it in your
Yes.
presentations, and then localize it in your content. So I think you said that, and
100%.
I'm going to put a link to that last interview I did with Clayton, where we went on for a half an hour to an hour on that. But here's another thing that I think mortgage and real estate professionals need to do is we need to go, if we're going to go beyond the transaction, we need to go beyond the target age of a home buyer, which is 34 years old. And I have this thesis. I'm co-founder of a nonprofit called First Home IQ, that by the age of 16, every American should know how savings works,
Yeah.
how investing works, how
Yeah.
budgeting works. They should be familiar with their banking app. Like that should be like, know what's in your banking app, know about tools like Acorn and other tools that teach savings and money smarts. By 18, old enough to vote. It's also old enough to get a credit card.
Yeah.
And by the way, you're going to start getting targeted with credit cards
Yeah.
and student loans. And every 18-year-old should know how their credit score is going to impact their life. And they should
Yeah.
be familiar with myfico.com. There's countless apps that will help them be smart with credit. And then by age 21, old enough to drink in America, it's old enough to understand the power of mortgage appreciation with mortgage leverage. And they should know how to use search apps. They should
Yeah.
know how to, make decisions around home ownership, and they should understand that the wealth gap in America is who owns
Yeah.
and who rents.
Yeah. Yeah.
You want to disagree with me on that one?
No, it's actually, it's amazing to me that I think about, man, you and I can go on about education. Oh God. Um, what kids are being taught these days is not the basics. And they come out and their world is social media. I'm not ragging on that, by the way, because I mean, we use social media as well, but their concept of money is very different than the reality and how to have money make money for you. Um, and yeah, I mean, to me, it's also a conversation you could have loan officers create those financial classes locally, and teaching that you're
Well,
building those relationships early, and have the realtor involved too, and go, look, here's the housing in this particular city, and here's the appreciation rates over the past 10 years. If you can get in and buy a house now, or get one with your family, or have three of you come buy a house, here's the amount of money you can make versus in the stock market. I mean, it's just when anybody's like, why do you always say it's a good time to buy real estate? Because if you're going to hold it, pretty much is.
yeah.
Like,
Well,
it depends
that's
upon what you're trying to do with it. But if your plan is to hold it or make it investment properties, I mean, I know a lot of people made a lot of money holding on to real estate over the period of time. It's always going to go down. It's always going to come back up. So, yeah, I mean,
yeah. Well, I would love, let's make a closing thought on this, and then I want to hear a little bit more about your platforms and how people can keep in touch with you. But if mortgage and real estate professionals went beyond the transaction, by the way, if you partnered with a loan officer or a realtor and you went into a local school, or how about if you just let your database know that there's a nonprofit called First Home IQ that has a 20-person quiz that's free, and it's just all about being, home ownership smart.
yeah,
If you let your database know that, you would do good, and you would do profits. You do
yeah,
loans if
yeah,
loan officers and realtors collaborated more.
yeah, yeah. Get a
So
financial planner in there too. Do the three of you guys
yeah,
class.
yeah,
You know?
the wealth team,
Yeah.
like at the end of the
Yep.
day, the advisors that surround a family around money, realtor, mortgage, financial advisors, if they collaborated more and went beyond the transaction, they'd all make more money, and in America would be better off.
Mhm.
So close out with a little. Well, first of all, what do you want to talk more about? You're talking to mortgage and real estate professionals, but mostly mortgage. Next Home, your new prop tech startup. Give us a little glance of what's coming soon out of your platforms.
Yeah. So Raise has been in development for a while to build an automated system. It's very sophisticated what it does. So it's installed on your phone and it integrates with your calendar and it uses location services. And we even are building a feature that'll track your phone calls so we can associate this phone call with your buyer for 45 minutes becomes something that's logged. And so here's an interesting stat for you. So we did a study with the Wave Group did a study, I should say, earlier this year. And the average 46% of buyers think that an agent spends less than 15 hours helping them buy a house. The actual amount of time that an agent spends on average is between 80 to 100 hours helping somebody buy a house. So you can see the issue here. And so when you start putting all of this data together, it changes the narrative. The buyer's like, oh my God, I had no idea you were doing all of that. And the best part about it, what do you think the agent says? I had no idea I was doing all of that either. So that's part of the really cool part about what the program's doing. We're launching right now. It's launching in the Bay Area, and then it's continuing to expand nationally. Our investors get access to it first. That investor network is massive. It's about 500,000 realtors now. So, it's going to get rolled out for them over the course of the next 12 months before it's open to general public. And then, we have aspirations to move it into other sectors to provide more transparency for what essentially other aspects of the industry does. The most exciting thing for mortgage is, and this is probably the thing I get most excited about, the buyer has a view, and this is, you guys will catch this real fast. The buyer has a view of everything the realtor is going to do, and as the realtor is doing them, it's updating them. We recognize that we can create a to-do list for the buyer. So when they can see the 150 things the agent's going to do, we saw they just signed their buyer rep agreement and they need to get pre-approved for a loan. We can insert the loan officer into that experience so that the buyer goes through this process, immediately starts getting pre-approved with the loan officer. Every single aspect of the transaction, we can incorporate all of the partners that an agent has in the experience. That is going to, what I think will completely shift the game on attach rate between helping the buyer use the companies and providers the agent's most comfortable with, and we'll have the best results. So we're excited to see that launch. And yeah, it's going to be interesting. The timing's certainly right. We're very excited about it. We're doing our third fundraise right now. This will be the last sort of friends and family round that we're doing. And then we go to Series A later in the year, and we'll do a pretty significant raise to expand the business on a national and then diversify it. So that's
Super impressive. I want to just
thanks.
give a quick glance on my screen because, guys, go check this out. RAYSE.com. See what's coming. I mean, when you look at the About page and, looks like a super pro team. But when you look at the, investors, it's who's who in real
That
estate.
hasn't even been updated in a while.
What's that?
That hasn't
Yeah.
even been updated in a
And I'm
while.
sure it
Yeah.
still goes, but to
Yeah.
hear that you have the size of a network that you have. And then I also, just for loan officers, look at how it's organized. Client presentation. What should you be working on and collaborating with your mortgage or your real estate professionals with? Collaboration. What
Yeah.
should you be talking about? How are we going to collaborate? How are we going to present? Obviously this is a platform that's going to do it all, but this is just a framework for how you can get ahead of the NAR settlement.
Yeah.
And my last thought, and then I'll give you closing thought. I've always said that technology is changing the world. It is changing the world. I mean, we're broadcasting this on Zoom. You're going to watch it on YouTube. It's a link. We live in a link economy. But when you really look, like when people roll out MortgageCoach or they roll out Trust Engine, I always say that, making that decision does not give you a competitive advantage. It's the leadership. 70% is leadership.
Mhm.
It is having sales meetings. It is having meetings that are effective with people. It is leadership that creates competitive advantage. So I'm going to close with that being, I hope this is a push for you guys to get ahead of NAR. Listen to what was said here. I think you could share this with a realtor. They would get a lot of value
For
from
sure.
this conversation.
Yep.
What are your closing thoughts, brother?
Look, there's going to be winners in all of this. In every opportunity, whether people are scared or not, there's opportunities to grow your business, make money. I think technology won't replace, loan officers or agents. I think technology empowered loan officers and agents will be the future. I think that the more you can embrace transparency and really figure out how to show consumers what you do, you don't have nothing to worry about. And I think from there, you got to get confident with what your services are, get good at presentation, get good at follow up, and you're gonna be just fine. So.
Yeah. And I can't think of how many times I've interviewed someone that does $100 million a year in business, and it's all about what they show the customers, not what they tell the customers, what they show the customers. So
Yeah.
hopefully you got lots of value. If you are watching this for the first time, make sure you subscribe to the Mortgage Coach YouTube channel. We love realtors too. Hey, any real estate agents, subscribe to our channel. We also have a very active Facebook group, Trust Engine Productivity Mastermind. Check it out. If you are not following savageinsights.com, that's where I am updating whoever my next interview is. I'm putting that at the top. My favorite recent interview is usually number 2 at savageinsights.com. And also make sure that you subscribe to the YouTube, or not YouTube, but Savage Insights Mobile Club. Two, no more than 3 times a week, I am sending out a text message informing you on the best content in this platform. Anyways, this is a wrap. Take care, everybody. And we're going to have to do this again.
Thanks, my friend. Looking forward to it.
All right. Take care.